very much for that introduction. And after the awesome history component of the next talk, feels like, anyway, we're going to really switch. What I'm presenting is basically a photo essay. As was mentioned, I'm at the University of British Columbia in Vancouver in Canada. And I'm also a member of the museum committee of the American Ornithology Union, as is Paul Sweet, whom I know most of you know. So what has happened in terms of the presentation I'm doing today? It's actually two parts. Igor asked me to also introduce my whole website, which is, it was designed to try to, for the next generation, it was designed to get away from textbooks that had line drawings and to make something that was for our digital age and to try and get volunteers and students interested in specimens and in museums. So compared to what we've just seen, it's going to seem very flashy and very bright, and there's a reason for that. So let's start. So that's the title of my talk. We'll do that second. So this is my actual website, and it's on our museum page, the BD Biodiversity Museum. And it's a total of roughly 900 PowerPoint slides, and someone made me count. It's around 44,000 words. And all the slides are independent. So if you're doing a presentation and you just want 2 slides, you just take them and put them in your own presentation. And it's also meant so that people not in museums, but maybe park staff, high school teachers, other people can get information as well. And it's used for teaching in quite a few collections. So right now I'm going to show basically 1 slide from each section just to give you a taste of it. Okay, so this one was basically, as I said, to try and get young people interested in collection, and also to say young bird watchers, if you come and volunteer at the museum, and we rely heavily on volunteer labor to help manage our collection, you will get to know your birds better. So the very first PowerPoint is on doing spread wings. In our particular collection, we use them a lot. Every single skeleton we prepare also has DNA. We collect muscle, heart, and liver. And every single skeleton has 1 wing, which can help you identify the bird, age the bird, and also all the feathers are useful for isotope analysis. And I find this a very good starting point with students and with volunteers. They get to watch all the other specimens being prepared in the room. They get to learn where the equipment is, where the scissors are, and they prepare a wing. And if they don't like it, and we do this even if they're going to end up preparing mammals, if they don't like it, then we have spent very little energy on that person. So this is an example of the presentation. I give them homework before they come in. They have to read this, and it also gives methods in history. Then there's the actual learning how to skin your first bird, which is a linear process from the start to the beginning. We show 2 methods, what I call the traditional methods, which is from the cloaca to the sternum, and then a method that a lot of us use in North America, which is from the neck to the base of the sternum. Then part 3, because you cannot show every kind of bird in 1 PowerPoint because the students will get confused, we all do all the special methods for different taxa in part 3. And then this is duplicated in terms of stuffing. It's just stuffing 1 bird from start to finish. And then in this particular one, other methods, I think there's 5 different ways of closing the beak, because obviously a parrot is done very differently from a hummingbird. This is a very popular one, and it includes information on basically how to sex the birds, how to tell whether or not the females have already laid an egg or not, because that's information we put on our data sheets. And it has 2 quizzes. The first quiz is intended to give, is 10 birds, and is intended to give confidence. And the second quiz is called Clear as Mud, and is intended to explain that sexing birds takes a long time to learn. Also, there are asides as during all the PowerPoints. This particular geandromorph was prepared by Robert Ridgway in about 1910. And they're very unusual, and I don't know whether you've seen one, but they basically have one testes and one ovary. And the plumage is fascinating. Okay, then we have part 7 is on skull pneumatization, which we record on our data sheets to help us age the birds. And the second part of that, and this is obviously 0%, and you can read the newspaper through it. The students like that part. They also like trying to do it themselves. And then the second part is how to make skeletons. One thing, DNA, collecting DNA, gut analysis. And then for part 9, trying to make every set of slides do 2 jobs. It is on how to wash and dry birds, but it's also on how to collect ectoparasites. Now, something that goes along with the series is, this was a meeting in 2012 in Vancouver, the North American, I'm going to forget, NAOC 5, whatever it stands for. And we did 5 hours of filming of people preparing birds. And then recently we did another half hour on how to wash birds for ectoparasites. So that's about 5.5 hours of videos. Okay, number 10 is recording fat levels. And in this one, I found 3 different scales for recording fat levels, and they're all there. And one thing that is common to all the PowerPoints is it's not like I'm trying to advocate one method. I'm showing different methods and different scales and basically telling people to develop their own style. So cleaning fat birds. And then this one is a fun one. And in a lot of the presentations have pictures from museums all over North America and also from the Hungarian Museum and from the Naturalis in Leiden and I'm not going to say it right, but the museum in Stockholm, mainly because and the Australian Museum. And the reason there's so few is those are the only international museums I've been to outside of North America. So this is all different types of slides and also to give ideas on different storage methods. This one is in progress. It's on eggs. And these are all chicken eggs, and they're lovely different shapes. And this is what I'm going to be presenting in the second half of my presentation. And what we're looking at there is lungs and how you can actually do a test to determine whether or not a bird is drowned, which can be useful. And the last one, if I could re-pick a slide for the labeling, it'd be another one after a few of the conversations I've had today. But basically, a lot of people wanted me to put the labeling information first. I said no. The people that I've met that want to learn how to make specimens, they want to get dirty. They want to have the bird in front of them, cut it up right away. And I wanted to have labeling as something that you do something they would look at to see something to improve their skills and hopefully make them absolutely fanatical in terms of getting good data for every specimen they prepare. One thing that we have a big problem with is dates and people just quickly writing down something like 06/05/07 and you haven't a clue what it means. So, and also to make the labeling interesting, every single bird that's pictured in toto, not that one, is an aberrant plumage. And again, I did that so that novices would be more interested in actually looking at the pictures. Okay, so now we're going back to what I was originally going to present today. I've been working on this with the avian pathologist for our province for over 2 years. And it all started when the first bird came in with a case of TB. I had one about 2 weeks ago. And it was just a question of how to keep the students at the university and everyone in the lab safe, and for me to learn and to to know when it was a serious problem and when it was not. The result is over 200 slides, and I will not be presenting all those. I'm going to sort of skip around and just present it in a format of what I suggest people do when they get a bird, just to evaluate whether or not there's any need for concern. So, someone alluded to this earlier, and I wish Paul was here, because Paul Sweet from the American Museum, because I know that in one of the proceedings, he did a survey of the different museums to show what percentage of birds that are currently being prepared in museums are actually shot and collected, and the percentage is quite low. Correct me, but I think it was in the single digits. Someone else was creative in North America, and they figured out that the number of birds that are shot on purpose for North American museums equals what 2 pairs or 4 peregrine falcons would eat in 1 year. So it's obviously nothing to be very concerned about. This is from the State of the Birds 2014. This is cats, if you can't read it. So this is both feral and domestic cats, and it's in the billions. Then we get to windows, cars, and everything else. So again, I just wanted to state that because in our introductory remarks, it was talked about basically the concern that some of the general public have on the amount of birds museums collect, which is nothing. Okay, in this series, it always has to stress you have to be legal and consult a pathologist, and I think it's really good for a museum to have a pathologist that they have a relationship with so they can send samples. So, again, what do you do when you find a lot of birds that have been poisoned? And I also have another hat. I am certified by the Society for Wildlife Forensic Science, which is an international organization, as an avian forensic morphologist, which means that I get involved in determining cause of death determinations. And because I'm going to be using those kind of words, I wanted to explain what I was talking about. So we're going to go on a little fishing story. And what I want to explain is the difference between cause of death, mechanism of death, and manner of death. So in this story, you get up in the morning when it's still dark and you go fishing. And then at some point, you've got a really big one on the line. And when you land it in the boat, it ends up to be a bird. So what happened there? The cause of death is the fish hook. The mechanism of death is being towed at high speeds behind the boat. And the manner of death is drowning. And in this particular picture, we know that the cause of death is always going to be that arrow that is through the mallard's head, but unfortunately it's still walking around. So we can make guesses on what's going to happen. We can make guesses that the mechanism of death could be predation, it could be entanglement with vegetation, it could be a whole suite of things. And we're also guessing that there will probably be infection, but we don't know. But the cause of death is still going to be related to the arrow, which, so this is, I have a lot of what I call the legal slides, and I've got this one up for two purposes. This one is sort of North American based, just saying to make sure that you have the proper permits, and it does refer to this fact sheet, which helps, which is a very useful one that's been prepared on different diseases that birds get. Now, the reason I've got this one up here today is the position that a bird is found in can tell you a lot. In this particular position for this is known as sky gazing, and that's a sure sign it's been poisoned. Here's something even more dramatic that's called wing walking. And if you look at this vulture, the tail is up like a wren, and it died in this amazing position. And it can happen in various families of poisons, but for instance, it wouldn't happen if it was what we commonly call warfarin or the rodenticides, the anticoagulants, but it would happen with what's listed up there, barbiturates, carbonates, and organophosphates. So here you have your typical dead bird. And I picked one found in every continent except Antarctica. Good old barn owls. The first thing I suggest people look at is the feet. If the feet are clenched hard, there's a very good chance, let's say you've just thawed the bird from the freezer and you're about to start work on it, that's the first danger sign, if the feet are really, really tight. And again, if you tell the pathologist about this, they'll say, yeah, it's probably a poison. So this kind of strange feet is, of course, electrocution. The yellowfoot's fine. This is a juvenile bald eagle. And the pinkfoot has been cooked. And I'll get into electrocution a little bit later. And in the series, there's a whole section devoted to electrocution, the difference between entanglement in wires versus electrocution, etc. And of course, electrocuted birds smell electrocuted. And this foot, if you skinned it, would smell like chicken soup. Something else that's common on the West Coast, I was talking to colleagues on the East Coast, not as much, we get something called avian dry pox. And what's wonderful about this is it looks awful, but it's a virus. It's so specific that the one that the eagles get cannot be caught by the ravens, and the ones the ravens or the corvids have cannot be caught by the passerines. So it's almost each different family, sometimes each genera has its own virus, and it can't be caught by others. And of course, it's no problems for us at all. So it looks horrific, but it's fine. Sorry, I want to get away from that echo. I presume the volume's okay? Everyone can hear me properly? Yeah. Okay, so avian pox is not just on the feet. It comes out in anywhere where there's skin. Something else you see on the feet, but when you see this, which is kind of avian pox, it usually means that the bird was in some kind of captivity or it was in wildlife rehab. It can be very severe. This is sort of a mild case. And it's common in waterfowl, swans, geese that are kept on concrete, or ducks, and it's common in raptors, both owls and eagles and falcons. This is a slide just to tell people to relax. Not everything is a disease. This is a plain old infection. The pigeon got its feet caught in some baling twine in this case. Now I'm going to okay, so you've got your dead bird. You've finished looking at the feet. You found nothing wrong. Then I suggest the next thing you do is just generally look at the body condition of the feathers. This is a normal situation. This is just ectoparasites. And ectoparasites have a habit of eating the white part of any feather pattern first. The reason for that is that, especially in melon, there are basically chemical endings that is a good place for birds to cleanse their blood of the heavy metals, meaning arsenic and lead and mercury, and the ectoparasites know that, so they tend to avoid that and eat the white part first. Then you have electrocution. Electrocution smells burnt, and there's something sort of crispy and fried about it, versus natural gas flares, which is much more melted around the edges. And again, there's a lot more information on the actual PowerPoints, because I'm just showing you a few today. And again, the big difference between electrocution, if we go back there, your cause of death is basically grounding out two wires to cause the electrocution. Your mechanism of death can be various things. You can fly into it, you can do whatever. And then the actual manner of death is heart fibrillation. Occasionally it's a volt of electricity going through the bird's head, but usually it's through the heart, and you can actually see that when you open up the bird, that it's the heart shows signs of it, and there can be dried blood in sort of around. The other thing the PowerPoint goes into is how to find your entrance wound and your exit wound. Now, when you take natural gas flares, you got a totally different situation. There was no internal damage to the bird at all. It's only on the outside. Now, the bird can kind of get cooked, but because it's caught in the natural gas flare and it basically sets on fire. But it's basically all on the outside. Something else that's coming up is solar flux, and these pictures are stolen from the internet without asking, so therefore they don't have any credit. The one up at the top, if you see the little white tower, this installation is in California, and the mirrors all around reflect back up to the tower that boils water. It's 800 degrees Fahrenheit. I don't know how to do the translation, but it's really hot. And the other problem is what is known as the lake effect. The birds think all this blue is water, and they land. And if you happen to be a loon or some of the birds that have problems taking off, you're done for. So this was work that was done by the US Forensic Lab, and what they did is subjected passerine feathers, house sparrow in this case, an invasive species for us so they wouldn't get into trouble, and they subjected them to different temperatures. 350 degrees Fahrenheit is, I don't know what it is in centigrade, I should have looked it up, but it's basically the temperature you heat the oven when you usually cook meat or cake. And you can see that the feathers are quite resistant, but afterwards they get damaged. And the main sign that something has been exposed to solar flux is this curling, which doesn't happen in the other two types. Another thing that happens is in electrocution, you have mainly big birds. You've got the raptors, and you've got cranes and swans. Cranes are usually something else, but anyway. In the solar flux, it's proportionally, many more of the smaller birds are affected. The other thing that happens that's kind of fun is that the energy goes to the black part and melts the black part of the feathers. So you end up with this constriction of the feathers where the white remains its integrity a little longer and the black shrinks. And then throughout the PowerPoint series, there are summary slides, and this is meant to be incredibly general, but just to, because you'll always have you might have a case that's sort of halfway in between, but it's just sort of like a check sheet on what to look for. And again, something I forgot to say at the beginning, this series is not supposed to turn you into a pathologist or a vet, but it's supposed to give you the vocabulary so that when you're on the phone, you can say something sensible or in your email. Instead of just saying, I've got a bird and it's really weird, really interesting, you can look at this PowerPoint or dial it up on your cell phone and just have a little bit of vocabulary so that you can better describe what you're looking at. Back to avian pox. Again, it's not contagious to us, but my God, it looks freaky and awful. And I did one bald eagle that had it so bad that we call her wart face in the collection, that we decided she couldn't see it all on that side. Something else we've got on in Alaska and again down the west coast, but I understand there's an ivory-billed woodpecker from the 1800s, someone told me, that also had avian keratin disorder. It was a juvenile. I should find out more about that. Anyway, what happens in this is the beak just keeps on growing. It hasn't been studied yet. I was with a group that collected some birds for it to be studied, but unfortunately that person died and no conclusions were reached. So we call it longbill as a nickname, and officially it's avian keratin disorder, and it can be every which way. And it's spreading in North America. It's gotten to the other side of the Rockies. This is Trichomonas. Again, a nasty looking thing. This one is a protozoan, and it causes beak abnormalities. And something that it can also happen is, I heard of a case where the soft palate, the top of the beak, just fell out of the bird, and then it bled to death. But normally it's just babies. Something that's fun is using what we call a black light or a woodman's lantern to look at, to ascertain whether or not a bird's been poisoned. And this is cyanide, but be aware that vitamin B does the same thing. So if a bird has just come out of rehab or is a pet bird, it could also glow. So that's just a quick test. And this is unpublished information from our avian pathologist. She can guess which birds have consumed rodents that have been poisoned by warfarin or one of the anticoagulants by looking at the mouth of the bird, and the pale mouth, because basically what happens is these birds bleed to death, and she can make a good guess by looking at the mouth. So what happens here, a normal bird's stomach should be yellow when it's healthy. If it's been poisoned or some other thing is wrong, it may turn black, it may turn all sorts of colors. So if it's yellow, you have nothing to worry about. I'm not too sure whether I'm using the mic properly, am I? Okay, good. So your basic anticoagulant can look like that. That's the total sort of waterfall effect when you open it up. And sometimes it's not as severe. I had to cut out a lot of slides. The big test is you open up the intestine, just take slices in random places, and if blood's coming out of the intestine, then the bird should be sent for testing if it's of interest to the the government in your area. An awful lot of the different poisons and so on, I explain how it should be packaged, because certain tests, it cannot be in plastic. Certain tests, sorry, let's do it the other way. Certain tests, they want you to wrap it up in foil. Sometimes they want it in glass jars. Sometimes they want it in plastic. Sometimes they want it in buffered formalin. But again, that will depend on the lab that processes samples. I do want to talk about avian tuberculosis. And our protocol is anything with avian tuberculosis has to be incinerated as soon as the test is complete and comes out positive, even though it is not contagious to mammals or humans. And I'm very glad it isn't. And what happens is throughout the series, I put active links to PDFs that give you more information. And I'm always looking to make the series better. So if you know of a publication that gives even more information, I'll either put them both on or replace it. So basically it just tells you to watch out, and different, even though we can't get it as humans. Now, tuberculosis can also be a bone outgrowth, and it's basically trying to isolate the fungus, and it can look like a bunch of grapes on the inside of the bird. And this is another disease, and unfortunately the pathologist used her knife too fast. This is called rice disease or rice breast disease, and it's in the muscle. Tuberculosis is in the liver, it's in the spleen, it is not ever in the muscle. And this is another one where it is not harmful to humans, and there's again, there's a PDF with more information, and it does look like grains of rice. It's very common in ducks are at least in the along our coast. Birds, as you know, have a very different method of breathing. They have lungs, but they also have all the air sacs. And if you see anything funky on the air sacs, something's wrong. This is what an air sac should look like, just a pink membrane. And the most common cause for concern up our area is a type of black mold, aspergillosis, and it's common, and I'm sure it's here too. It's in any marsh, anywhere where vegetation is growing, is basically decaying. And it's not something to be terribly concerned about, even though it's incredibly ugly in the bird. We do put on a mask for a strong case of it, but it also depends on your room. Our room is incredibly well ventilated. It's rated for formalin, which means you get air exchange at the rate of 8 times an hour. But you can see that the clear membrane is now, it basically looks like leather, it's thick. And when I go birding in the marshes to look at shorebirds or the owls or whatever, I am breathing aspergillosis because it's in almost every marsh you can think about. In Vancouver, we get a lot of it because we've got a drought in California. It's frozen north of us, but in Vancouver, we have these fields with 1 inch of water to 6 inches of water all winter long. So the birds get sick. More aspergillosis. Something that's unusual is gout. And if you actually cut open the neck and the legs, you can find the crystals of uric acid. I've done it on I found it on an eagle that was only 6 months old and an adult swan. I'm not I mean, it's the same reason as in us, and it's a powder all over the place. The last thing I'm going to talk about is lead, and I'm not too sure from where I'm standing. Is that green? Does the liver look green? No, too bad. Okay, depends on the projectors, because it is green. With lead poisoning, is that one green? No, okay. So basically the liver can turn green. And one thing I want to show here, it says symptoms of, and then the last one is none of the above. And I've got that quite often, in that there's a list of symptoms you can see, and sometimes it's kind of blind. Now the important thing when you've got a bird that you think is lead poisoned is to look at the stomach. A normal stomach, which is this side, the stomach moves and it's fairly soft. With the lead poisoning, the stomach goes totally hard, and the digestion has to go further up in the proventriculus. And what happens is usually you'll see that the bird is basically it's losing breast muscle. It's eventually going to be totally emaciated and thin. And what we find is they usually get electrocuted. And people mistake the lead poisoning for electrocution. And what's going on is the swans are used to flying all together. And then this one that has the lead poisoning, it can't keep up. All the swans go up and over. I could do it yesterday, and then bang into the wires. So we do, when I look at birds, I try to see why they died and then not get too caught up in the obvious and look for underlying signs. Now, why bother? I'm basically the preparator for the museum. I'm making skins. The reason I'm bothering is because I think it's important for the data sheet. And here's just a fun slide. Birds do die of natural reasons. I'm doing it for the data sheet because I think it could be that someone's going to come to the collection and say, hey, we got a new test now. Do you have any birds that were killed by poisons? Do you have any birds that were electrocuted? We want to see whether we can, we don't know what the tests are going to be in the future. The same way that when the first skins were developed, we never thought they would be doing isotope analysis or DNA testing. So I like to have an incredibly well documented data sheet for every bird that I do. So I've gotten interested in this cause of death because I think it's a good idea. Now at this point I need to know where my time is and whether we're going to do questions, because I've got another little quick topic, but if I'm out of time. So, whoops, I wanted just to say thank you. There's lots of people to thank. And again, if you go to Google and just type in UBC Birds and Museum, you'll come to my website. Last week, at the moment, the website's down. They're doing some revamping and should be up in 2 weeks. So, thank you very much for your attention.